From the streets to the State House, Africa's youths are no longer chanting for change across the African continent. They are becoming the change themselves. From Lagos to Monrovia, Douala to Bamako, young people have led powerful protests demanding justice, equity and opportunity across the African continent. However, the question remains, how do we move from protest to policy? Today, in the course of this program, Talking Points, we explore the next frontier for Africa's youth, not just raising their voices, but writing the laws, shaping the systems, and sitting at the decision-making table. What are the barriers? Who is already breaking through? In addition, how can today's youth activists become tomorrow's business gurus, change makers, governors, ministers, and even presidents? This is not just a conversation. It is a blueprint for a generational shift. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Points. Stay with us. Hello, beautiful audience of 4U Media Africa. It's always a pleasure to be in your company. And like every other time, we have conversations that are paramount to the African continent and beyond. This day, we focus on the capacity of the youth on the African continent, especially at a very time where we have seen numerous protests across Africa, from country to country, across the continent, striving for change, striving for good governance amidst others. And of course, we have this conversation this day in a bid to start the way forward for the African continent. And to commence this discussion this day, I have a panel of experts. With me here in the studio is Mr. Gilbert KIMBI, who is joining us in his capacity as a marketing consultant as well as a youth leader. You're welcome on board.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, share your expertise in the course of this program.
It's a pleasure.
All the way from Nigeria, we're equally been joined by HASSAN TAIWO SOWETO, who was joining us in his capacity as the national coordinator of the Education Rights Campaign, Lagos, Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Yes, thanks for having me. Thank you.
So we're going to deep dive into today's conversation, but we should note that there shall be a lady that should be joining us all the way from Liberia subsequently. Nonetheless, we kickstart this conversation. I'm going to debate with you, Mr. Gilbert KIMBI. Beg your pardon. So, of course, we have reiterated that the youth do have a very crucial role to play. Taking, for instance, the concept of Cameroon, the context where we find ourselves. When you look at what's happening in Cameroon, spanning across the African continent, what do you think are some of those issues, that youths are constantly crying for when it comes to asking for change?
Yes, I think this is a very sensitive and a topic which, every single day we do live through. Thank you. So I do believe that every youth, we are youth, and just like say when Cameroon,
exactly,
yes, do relate to this issue, because this affects the quality of our living. This affects how we grow up and how we are able to take care of ourselves and people around us. So talking about the issues which are affecting the youth at this point in time, we have the youth who usually cry out about bad governance. We'll talk about poor educational systems, the poor health conditions which we do find ourselves. These are common things which a good number of youths do complain about in our environment. And I'm happy to be part of this session, to contribute to this conversation and see how, as youths, we may not only, raise these issues, but how can we together contribute towards making this better? Because it's not just for the leaders
exactly,
have their time, but it's our time, so we need to be able to participate to see how we can make things better for ourselves.
Exactly, and of course that will lead me to the next question, which I'll be targeting to you. Hassan, you have been at the center or at the forefront of protests in Nigeria, notably the End Bad Governance, in Nigeria, which we saw some time ago, and of course, which is upcoming. But then, when you look at the context of the African continent, Nigeria is not the only context where we have seen this protest, arise across the continent. We saw it in Kenya, we saw a couple in Cameroon, we saw others across different parts of the continent. Now, within this said context, you've listened to your co-panelists about, the barriers that youths face when it comes to their quest for change across Africa. From your perspective, having witnessed this firsthand, what can you tell our audience?
Well, thank you very much for that question. My regards to my co-panelists over there. I'm always happy to have this kind of conversation because obviously problems in each African country cannot be solved just in that country. The problems of every African state can only be solved on a continental basis, which is why these kind of conversations can be part of the process, of building a movement that connects African youth and African working people from one country to another, to be able to build, people's power to begin to challenge, to solve all of these problems. In terms of the barriers that we face, obviously the first barrier that exists in every African country is the crisis of mass poverty in the midst of abundance. This is not just the case in Nigeria, which we know that it's an oil-producing country. It's equally the case in Cameroon, in Kenya, because there's hardly any African country that is not stupendously rich, especially in terms of mineral resources. The poverty of Africa, therefore, is not a product of lack of wealth. Actually, it's a product of a system of governance called capitalism, under which the wealth of the continent is stolen by the local ruling elite in cahoot with the imperialist masters. In the Anglophone part of Africa, you have the American and British and German multinational firms who are engaged in the mindless looting of the resources of the countries in that part of the continent. While in the Francophone part of Africa, obviously you have France, as well as multinational firms that are connected to that global entity, also, doing much of the same, which is just to steal the wealth, while just leaving a few crumbs to the African leaders. So that ultimately, what we need to do is to build a real struggle on the ground. But of course, what has also happened over the years is that African leaders have also created additional barriers to ensure that the struggle of the African youth and the African people is not able to unseat them, is not able to win around the issues that we are fighting for. So that's why you see, when you look around Africa today, there's hardly any African state where you don't have an ongoing dictatorship. Whether in Cameroon, where you have had the same person ruling for over 40 years, or in Nigeria, which has regular elections and frequently changing faces, it is the same dictatorship. The police, are always there to attack people. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly is only recognized in the Constitution, but on the ground, it is not recognized. So that here in Nigeria, you can't call a protest, without the police and the army coming out to attack protesters. And I'm sure that's also the same in Cameroon. We saw that play out in Kenya, of course, last year, where you had, tens of Kenyan youths killed and murdered by the state because they were fighting against the finance bill. Those are additional barriers that have been placed in the path, of the effort of African youth and African working people to fight for change. But again, these barriers are not stronger than the power of the people. And that is where we continue to derive our confidence from, that regardless of how these barriers have been affecting our struggle will go on regardless, and one day and someday we are going to prevail.
Exactly. One day change will come, and of course that's why we have channels like this. Like you said, it's in a bid to connect the continent and drive the change we wish to see in Africa. Now back to you, Mr. Gilbert. You listened to your co-panelist, but then he said something that was very important. At the end of the day, it's about the betterment of the African continent. From your perspective, today we're discussing, you know, we're moving away from protests and seeing how the young people of Africa, which constitute a majority, can, you know, move forward to seeing how they can be able to take part in decision making, in trying to drive the change from within the continent of Africa. So now we have a political power in Africa that is concentrated amongst, you know, the old guard, if I may put it that way. Being that we want change, young people want change, and we're advocating, especially the continent of Africa advocates more often, you know, for the youth people to get into governance, to get into leadership, to get into decision making per se. How can they shift this narrative across Africa?
Okay, thank you, Madam NJIX, for this question. And getting into this, how we youths can, you know, contribute to this shift, you know, like you rightly said, when we look at the government at this point in time, when we look at our leadership, we see that a majority, you know, is made up of very elderly persons. So just like my co-panelists, thank you for being here with us. It's really a privilege. And just like he said, about collaboration, you began talking about collaboration, you know, that this is a fight for Africa. So this is not just something which may be affecting our individual countries. Looking at how we can contribute as youths to this shift, you know, increasing the impact or the level at which youths can contribute to policies, can contribute to change, can contribute to decision making in our various countries and in Africa as a whole. I believe, from my perspective, should be from a constructive, we could look for alternative solutions. Looking into, just like my co-panelist said, there is this fear, you know, fear of one's life, from what we see, what happens to others who have made attempts towards, you know, towards speaking out of the challenges which we are facing. So this creates a lot of panic, this creates a lot of fear, and a good number of capable persons, capable youths decide to, okay, like, due to fear, okay, no longer talk or no longer take actions. But I do believe that we could use an alternative solution, rather than, you know, using conflict, or rather than just spelling out the shortcomings. We could look into constructive solutions, such as providing value. You know, policies are there to be able to provide, you know, better opportunities, to improve on entrepreneurship, to enable that the population, you know, the African population, builds out more entrepreneurs who are able to provide more resources, better jobs, so that we could have, you know, all of those positive improvements, increase in employment rates, better health systems, better living conditions, and all of these will require one foundational resource, which is that is resource, finances. So as young individuals, I do believe that, okay, if at our individual levels, we, from an informal perspective, before getting to a formal perspective, work on creating value, that is starting up entrepreneurial activities, starting up businesses, starting up health initiatives at an individual level. For example, before coming to my example, I do have this classmate who is of my age mate, you know, in his early 30s, which at the university level was constantly deliberating and thinking how he could, you know, start up something which would create real impact in his community. And as a result, he got serious funding that attracted not only our government, but
investors from Cameroon.
Yes, investors from Cameroon. But internationally, we had the Queen of England inviting him for a dinner and all of that. And today, I see him, you know, in government associations such as the Northwest Development Fund, and this is a youth. This, I know he's achieved that through his contribution to the his community, such as providing, you know, value, employment, and all of that. So I believe this is one alternative, you know, which we as youths can, you know, begin to, you know, contribute to this change. And I believe that if we do this, and now we get to the opportunity wherein we are able to sit with our leaders, current leaders, and we are making suggestions, for change that we could contribute, or this other person could contribute, and we are presenting what we've been able to achieve so far, I believe they can take a chance on us. So this is what I will be able to contribute to this. Thank you.
And indeed, African youths can contribute to their communities, they can contribute to their countries and to the African continent. Back to you, Hassan. Now, you listen to Gilbert and the point he shared so far, as far as, you know, the topic is concerned. But looking at the context of Nigeria, I really like to stay in Nigeria while looking at the greater African continent, because there are a lot of examples we can borrow from each and every African country. Now, he mentioned that African youths should be open to thinking about how they can, you know, develop their respective communities, which is going to expand to national development, national growth, and so on. Now, from your perspective, what structures do you think are needed, you know, within the context of Nigeria to protect and mentor emerging youth leaders that across the country, you know, so that they can move from activism to real governance within the nation?
Yes, thank you very much. I would answer the question in two parts.
Okay.
The first part would be to recognize, as my co-panelists have said, the fact that the contributions of African youth
Hassan, please, could you unmute your mic? Hassan, can you hear me?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Okay, great. So I was saying that first and foremost, I completely agree that all of us as Africa's youth will bear responsibility to do the best we can in demonstrating that new vision of Africa that we want to see. And that starts at the individual level. And obviously in Nigeria here, we have similar examples, as you have mentioned, of young people actually doing the best they can, trying to thrive on their own, and on that basis extending opportunities to everyone. But at the end of the day, what we have also seen is that because of the role that the Nigerian state plays in terms of determining the character of the economy, determining policies, determining taxes, legislations, and all of that, the individual efforts can only go so far unless the state changes its economic and political approach and a policy to one that actually can support people's individual effort to thrive. What we have seen in Nigeria is that at some point, youth who are doing their best individually eventually get frustrated. And that is why you have seen over the past few years now, this huge number of Nigerian young people just running out of the country. It is called Japa syndrome. You know, people are running away. Doctors, you know, tech experts, all kinds of people just leaving the country, you know, in droves. And usually when they leave the country, they don't even get better jobs in Europe when they get there. Sometimes some of them who are working as bank managers there in Nigeria, they get to a place at the UK and they're working as security officers, they're working as cleaners. But they prefer to, you know, subject themselves to such kind of humiliation because they think that the UK can have structures that can ensure that their children, you know, will be able to live in a better society, in a better community. something which does not exist in Nigeria. So that where I'm going, therefore, is that while individual efforts are important, it seems to me that in Africa right now, we are faced, with the reality that what Kwame Nkrumah said back then in the 60s, is what we all have to return to. Kwame Nkrumah was a former president of Ghana. And he has a very popular quotation. He said, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and every other thing, shall be available to you." I think that the challenge that, African youth and African working people face today is the need to fight for that political power. Because when we have that political power, we can use that to be able to determine the kind of country, the kind of continent we want. And that can ensure that individual effort from that point of view can then begin to thrive. And this is where I get to the second part of my answer. When you are talking about what kind of structures that young people, will require to be able to transform, from protests into policy. I think first and foremost is that young people need to organize themselves beyond just civil society activism. What we have so far, whether in Nigeria or Ghana or Cameroon or Kenya today, are young people organized into civic groups, utilizing those groups as platforms to organize protests and all of that. Yes, we also have a number of youth-centric NGOs like in Nigeria, but that are pushing for policy reforms and all of that. But I think that young people also need to join up with other social forces, like the working class, for instance, to build an alternative political party that represent the interests of the ordinary people. Because actually, what we lack in Africa is not democracy. There's actually democracy in almost all parts of Africa. But what we lack, even in those democracies, is a genuine political representation of the interest of the ordinary Africans on the ballot. I mean, for instance, in Nigeria, we have possibly over 30 to 40 political parties. But oftentimes in elections, all of the political parties actually represent the same capitalist ideas. So that at the end of the day, when people are voting in elections, they are simply voting for the same thing, despite the fact that they have like 30-something options on the ballot. So that is an optionless election, and that is what exists almost across the continent. And that is what has made election and a democracy a farce. And that is what is contributing, for instance, to the regression of democracy across the continent. And of course, the allure of military rule, because it's like, okay, let's put off the pretense. There's actually no real democracy. So why not just have soldiers in a camouflage take power so that we know that there's actually a full-blown dictatorship. That is where we are in Africa today. For us to be able to begin to address this, we need genuine political representation, for Africa's youth, for Africa's working people. That is what can then ensure that the young people are able to achieve full organization that can ensure that from protest, we actually begin to challenge in such a way that we can get to power and utilize power to begin to develop and implement that vision of Africa that we all have. I would just like to end with this by saying that when it comes to the vision for Africa, for young people, we have to be very clear about it. If young people's aspiration to get to power or to get to the leadership of society is simply to repeat the same economic programs that the old guards have been implementing since 1960, then we are just deceiving ourselves. And what do I mean? If you look at the history of all African countries from 1960 up to now, you will see that almost all of the 54 thereabout African states have been implementing the same economic programs for the past 60-something years. And those are IMF World Bank economic programs of capitalism, of opening up the economy, of deregulation. That is what is happening in Nigeria. That is what is happening in Cameroon. That is what is happening in Ghana. That was what led to the eruption of protests in Kenya last year. It is a program of liberalization, of opening up Africa's economy, Africa's market, Africa's resources, Africa's wealth, to the global north. For those wealth to be stolen, for those minerals to be stolen. That is why today, when you look at what is happening in Sudan, what is happening in DRC Congo, despite the wars going on there, what is the interest of Trump in DRC Congo? It is not to stop the war, but rather to get access, to the minerals. We need a new kind of Africa on the basis of socialism, under which that wealth that exists can be utilized to meet the interest of all. That is the kind of Africa that I think that young people like myself and my colleague in the room should aspire for. That is the kind of African vision that can ensure that we do away, with the crisis of the past 60 years.
Indeed, that is the way forward to bringing change to the African continent. As Elaron mentioned, we have been joined by ALPHIA Faith KEMOKIA, who is joining us in her capacity as the program manager of the Young Political Leadership School Africa, and of course she's a youth leader joining us all the way from Liberia. It's a pleasure to have you on board, ALPHIA. I'm going to kickstart with your question as well. You've listened to your co-panelists, and given the context of Liberia, a nation, that underwent and is currently a post-civil war, is in a post-civil war era, if I put it that way. Looking at the context in which the nation is, could you paint to our audience? We've painted a picture from Cameroon to Nigeria to Kenya to Ghana and meet other nations. But then what does genuine youth leadership look like in Liberia, and how can this help in building trust, in democratic institutions?
Thank you for having me on the show today, Sharon. It is such an honor to be here. It's quite busy on my end because we are preparing to host the 12th cohort of the Young Political Leadership School. But nevertheless, we cannot turn down an opportunity to talk about youth empowerment, youth in politics, and, just the whole topic around youth engagement and all that. Exactly. So great time I've had listening to the other speakers. I must commend their input and everything. For Liberia, democracy and youth empowerment means a lot to us. Our country, the youthful demographic in Liberia is overwhelming. We have over 70% of our population below 35. And for us, that is a window of opportunity for us, for young people to be empowered to take on leadership role. But also, it is an opportunity for us to also engage now. And most of the time, what is regular across Africa, people say young people should wait, it's not yet their time. But I think we have to define our waiting period, and that's what we've been doing in Liberia. Why we wait? What can we get involved with? Because we believe that waiting is not wasting for us. We believe that while we wait, we want to build trust with intergenerational relationship, to get involved, not just to have a seat at the table, but to truly influence the decisions that are made at the table. So there has been a lot of structural changes in Liberia so far as it relates to youth engagement. There are statutory organizations like the Federation of Liberian Youth and other organizations that have been doing quite well when it comes to youth engagement with decisions that are made in the country. Most recently, our president, His Excellency Joseph Newman Boyka, did something remarkable. We all commended the effort. He called the young people in Liberia for a town hall meeting to actually have a conversation with us where we are, what are some of our needs, and what do we want as a nation, what do we look forward to as young people in this nation. I was fortunate to be a part of that discussion, speaking and representing youth in politics and governance. And the outcome of that meeting gave birth to the establishment of the Youth Advisory Council, a National Youth Advisory Council, because our thing is to be included, to have an inclusive government where young people can have a seat at decision-making table. But the challenge here is the tokenistic approach, just to have young people there, but to influence real change. It's almost like you can have the seat, you can take the position, but then where does the advocacy turn into actual change? Well, it's not just about being there, the whole tokenistic approach. So we have been pushing through advocacy, liaising with policy makers to say, hey, this is not the end of our advocacy. We advocated for a seat. We deserve to be heard. And we want to see the things that we recommend become tangible results, that we can all be proud of tomorrow. So all of that is happening in Liberia. And of course, young people are engaged. One of the things that we are grateful for through the Young Political Leadership School in Liberia, we have had series of engagements with young people from the community level. Before the election, we had the National Youth Manifesto. What is it that young people want in Liberia? What are our needs? We did that because we wanted political parties to see that we care about certain things and to incorporate them in their agenda so that nothing for us without us. You prioritize our issues.
Exactly.
This is how we're going. Yeah, this is how we are going to vote for you. But what I would say to just close up is the efforts are being made, and we as young people in Liberia, we've recognized that we got to keep pushing, because if we stop, they will stop as well. Like what I just mentioned, of course, the National Youth Advisory Council was established, but then the issue here is with having real influence to initiate change. And there are many roadblocks because of the trust that exists with intergenerational leadership. We need our leaders to see us as the next in line. If we are not adequately prepared, if we are not adequately involved, there isn't any much that we will do when our time comes. So we are not a threat to them. Don't want them to see us as a threat. In Africa and even in Liberia, we want them to see it as the fact that you are going to wake up the next morning means that there is a tomorrow, and we are the ones that will handle the tomorrow. But if we are not prepared now, if we don't have the experience now, if we don't collaborate for change, if we don't work to learn from them and to unlearn, to take the good and leave the bad, we need to be incorporated so that when the time comes, we cannot be completely ignorant to governance or leadership or politics and so on. But there are some issues surrounding it, but we are determined to keep pushing because, like I said, our population is overwhelmingly young. So it's something that we need to be involved in.
Okay, I'll be staying with you, Alphia. You mentioned a lot of points, which I would like to pick up from there. We have this issue across Africa, youth-led movements often suffer with this issue of sustainability. Now, you mentioned that there are a lot of, structures that have been put in place to ensure that the youth in your country are able to engage in a bit to create change, not just in your country, but it spans across the African continent. Now, from your perspective, from what you've been able to experience so far, what structures should be put in place to ensure that we don't have this issue of sustainability and ensuring that these youth-led movements, they end up, delivering the expected change for which they were created?
So when it comes to sustainability, one thing that comes to my mind, interesting, because I just wrote it down, is legal recognition of youth organizations to access funding and participate in formal consultations. There has to be a legal recognition of youth organizations, and also we need to invest more in strategic alliances, like with civil society groups, with academic institutions, and reform-minded policymakers. I think when we take those steps, it's something that's going to be sustainable. And also, we have to invest with what we have currently. We cannot, there is this dependency syndrome that is in Africa, or most African countries, waiting on donor support and stuff. We need to utilize the resources that are available for our benefit to be able to be responsive to our needs and our interests as well. I think when we take these steps along with others, we can have strategic sustainability for youth engagement in our countries.
Thank you immensely, ALPHIA. Now I'll be moving back to you, Gilbert. You listen to ALPHIA, and of course you listen to Hassan and the input they have so far on this topic. Now, within the context of Cameroon, having listened to them and what they had to share, Do you think that the Cameroonian youth are ready to move beyond or move past this issue of activism and actually get ready in taking practical steps that would prepare the nation forward, in taking Cameroon to the next level and that African continent?
Okay, thank you for that. And to say thanks to my co-panelist, picking up from there, and with the point which she did mention, that for us, like you're requesting, are the youths currently ready? Is that it? Are the youths currently ready?
Yes.
Yeah, to be able to
prepare them for elected or policy making roles.
Okay, good. In answering that question, I will say it actually depends on the just like I did mention, the involvement in. Okay, let me come to this again.
No problem.
Okay, so in order for us, the youths, to be able to step into leadership, to be able to influence what is happening, in order to influence how tomorrow is going to be, because we are going to be the leaders tomorrow. The elderly who are there will not be there for eternity. We actually need, at this point in time, just like my co-panelist said, begin gaining experience, begin getting involved to get to know actually what are these policies, what are the various areas which lead to a good governance, lead to a good functioning of a good country and a good Africa. So with regards to these and relating it to if we are currently ready to step into this, at this point in time, the probability is still very, very low. Just like I said initially when we were talking about what are the challenges we are facing, and what are some of the things which can be done to resolve these. And I was talking about, personal involvement and contribution to value. For example, I'm going to use the Northwest Development Fund, which currently, launched, a funding project to be able to encourage youths to get into the digital space. We all do live in different areas. The agricultural era gone and past, and we are in the AI era at this point in time.
True.
So actually, we have the government who at this point in time is offering the opportunity for youths who are willing to be able to take up this opportunity at this point in time, who are having any initiatives moving on, who are starting any digital how do we say, ideas, and the government is willing to come in with partnership. This is funding coming in from abroad. They are bringing in partnerships from abroad to be able to fund these initiatives for them to come to reality and to build, our environment. Now, this is not going to work if we as youths don't step up and show that, okay, we are ready to receive this funding and we are ready to use it to impact our community. So, and when we look at the percentage, when we, well, I'm saying this because I had the opportunity to be able to see what was the results, the number of persons, yes, the impact, the number of persons who filed it, and the result. We see close to 70% of the ideas coming in were rejected, meaning that there is probability, there is possibility for funding. However, we as youths need to be creative, we need to be productive until the knowledge which we have gotten, as we are growing up, we are educating ourselves and all of that, until we are able to put our knowledge, until we are able to put our expertise into productivity, we are not going to experience the change which we are looking for, which we are requesting. So this is, it's a two-way, conversation or change which is actually required. So we need our leaders to be able to listen to us, to be able to trust and to transfer decision making, or to get us involved into decision making. On the other hand, we as the young people need to be able to show proof of what we are doing in order to make change in our community. And like I did mention, there are several ways by which we can do this, because I'm sure a good number of persons watching may be asking, okay, so how can we do this? Because as a youth, most probably you may be thinking, in order to, most probably, I've been in a situation wherein I couldn't feed myself. I've been in a situation wherein, I couldn't take care of my family. So in this situation, do we look at the government, as the cause of the situation and most probably remain there? And most probably, at this point in time, you need to be able to take action. So what did I do? I took up the responsibility, and I was like, okay, I'm going to change the situation. And on an informal level, already I was an accountant as at then. I decided to learn a new skill, marketing. Today it's being advertised as I'm a marketing consultant. So those are personal initiatives which I took up. I learned the skill, and today I can say I've been able to train about 4,000 people, not just Cameroonians, across 7 countries, from the USA, from Canada, from Ghana, from Nigeria, Cameroon, and all of these. So using the digital space and all of that. So by so doing, I do believe this is creating value. And should I get the opportunity tomorrow, so what am I looking into? Again, I'm happy for situations such as these, wherein I can come in and share my ideas, share my contribution, to encourage we, the young people, that despite all of the so many shortcomings which we, the poor governance, the poor educational system, the poor health conditions or living conditions which are ongoing, there is a high possibility and opportunities for us to be able to, create value at our individual levels. And when given the opportunity, I believe that's what we are all looking for. When given the opportunity tomorrow, we'll be able to show, okay, this is what we've been able to achieve. And if we are given, this is what we are requesting. And if we are given the opportunity, we'll be able to create, we'll be able to deliver. I believe our elderlies will be able to take some risks.
So if I listen to you, Cameroonians are actually ready to, to take the helm of affairs, get into policy making roles across the nation. Now, I'll be channeling the next question to you, Hassan. You listen to your co-panelists who says that the youth should explore other avenues through which they can be able to create change across the African continent. From your perspective, looking at Nigeria per se, do you think Nigerian youths are ready, to lead the nation beyond activism and more?
Definitely. I mean, objectively, I could say a resounding yes to that. And we need to be soft on the current generations of Africa's youth, because if you go back 60 years, you look at the time when most of the current Africa's leaders were young, and then they came to power. From the point of view of who they were back then in the late 50s and early 60s, what they had personally accomplished, their intelligence quotient, their academic, achievement and co. Many of Nigeria's youth today, or Africa's youth today, if you compare them to the time in the 1950s when the current generation of Africa's leaders were taking power, there's a way you will say that the current generation of Africa's youth are even overqualified. There's hardly any African youth today that is not already a university graduate, possibly with 2 masters and even with a PhD. Whereas some 60 years ago, you were having Africa's leaders who were getting to power without even university education.
Primary school.
Some of them were soldiers who just took power, through the barrel of a gun. So that's why I said objectively you could say resounding yes that Nigeria's youth are very quite ready. Where I begin to have some bit of doubt about the readiness of Nigeria's youth or Africa's youth is from the point of view of the vision we have for Africa. Whether that vision demonstrates our preparedness to be able to come to power and do things differently. That is where I have my own doubt. And that is because everywhere you go to, different parts of the continent you go to, you see that there's a whole lot of anger and dissatisfaction with the condition of things. I mean, mostly by young people, because there's no country in Africa where young people are not the majority of the population. But when you interact with young people who are angry, who are dissatisfied, you find shockingly that very few people are able to articulate what the root of the problems are and then what the solutions would likely be. And that's why I think that as much as when you compare the current generation of Africa's youth to the Africa's leaders when they were taking power in the 1960s, you will say that Africa's youth the current generation are overqualified. When you do another level of comparison, and you compare the current generation of Africa's youth to the generation of Africa's youth in the 60s and 70s, those in the student movement back then, so those in political parties and all of that, from the point of view of their ideological and political consciousness, there's a way in which the current generation of Africa's youth are at a lower level. They are coming behind. Very few Africa's youth today, understand the history of their own country. There's an African proverb that says that when you don't know where you are coming from, there's no way you are going to know where you are going. The past informs the future. Because in many ways, the challenges that we are faced with today have been confronted in the past by previous generation. And some of the solutions that we need to develop actually have already existed. In the time past, in terms of the discourses that used to happen among Africa's youth back in the 60s, when you're talking about the lives of Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, these are people, who have left enormous materials and literatures about their vision of Africa. And I think that for anybody who is talking about reforming Africa today, or as young person wanting to step into power today, we need to have that relink, with the past. We need to go and study some of these things all over again, the ideas of these great men, who at the time when they were putting these ideas together were as young as 25, 26, 29, 30, more or less our own age, when they were distilling, the future of Africa. And I think that is by linking up with this kind of history that the current generation of Africa's youth can be able to build the ideological and political understanding of the root of the problem that we face, and then, what are the likely solutions. That is what can then ultimately ensure that we are prepared to come to power. Because again, I said this earlier and I'll say this again, there is no reason whatsoever for Africa's youth to come to power, if they are going to repeat the same thing that the old guards have been doing. I mean, because there's nothing wrong. there's no difference between a 90-year-old person ruling the country for 50 years and ruining the future of the country, compared to a 30-year-old person doing the same. There's actually no difference. There's no value for society. You know, whether the ruining of the country is done by a 90-year-old or is done by a 30-year-old. You know, where value will come to society is if a 30-year-old comes there, and then, you know, you have policies that are refreshing, policies that take society forward, policies that ensure that the wealth of society, you know, is made democratically available to all. And that's why those of us in the Nigerian left constantly, you know, push for the ideas and vision of socialism, you know, as that, you know, refreshing blueprint, you know, that Africa's youth can, you know, embrace, you know, as a basis, you know, to take power and then to begin to run Africa differently in the direction of liberating the continent.
Thank you immensely, Hassan. Now, moving forward to you, ALPHIA, now you listened to your co-panelists. Now, the question I have to ask is, we often criticize, you know, the governments that are in place. With your role as a youth leader, what role should youth play in holding governments accountable so at the end of the day, we don't end up, you know, becoming part of the very systems we so much criticize when we get into leadership roles? ALPHIA, are you with us? If yes, please kindly unmute your mic so we can get what you're saying.
Is it okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it is. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So, I mean, I just, as you asked the question, I smiled because it is a crucial role for us. Young people, I mean, not just young people, but citizens should play a very important role in holding government accountable. Accountability is a key signpost of democracy. So if we say we have a democratic state, we elect our leaders, definitely there is a social contract, and we elect them based on their agenda and what they told us they would do. So to ensure accountability is to uphold a key principle of democracy. Young people, I always tell people, when you cast a vote, it takes years before you have the opportunity to go back to the ballot box. So whatever you do should not be compromised. You should do it based on the issue and not just your relationship with the politician, not just what you can benefit now, but what the country, the community, the district can benefit as a whole. What is the agenda? Most times, especially in my country and other African countries, when there's time for election, we vote based on the now. What can we get now? The bag of rice, the T-shirts, maybe the little token we get, forgetting the bigger picture. And politicians are very smart. They are sensitive to this. They know what we need. So they bring a gist of it during election periods or campaign just to say, hey, just give me your vote, and then that's it afterwards. But what we need to pay attention to is their agenda. I will continue to say the young people should pay attention to politicians' agenda. What is in it for you? After you elect them, democracy is beautiful because it gives us the opportunity to decide what we want and to also hold our leaders accountable. So there's something we do in Liberia with young people. We even do it with the government. The institution I work for, Neighborhood Partners for Democratic Development, we are the host of the Young Political Leadership School. So we have what we call the President Meetup Project. During elections, we have people across the 15 counties who track all of the promises that is made by the top political candidates for presidential elections. And then after the election, we also monitor their agenda, their manifesto, to say, okay, we're going to track all of these promises and release annual reports to the country so that people can be able to advocate based on the issue. So once we started doing that, there has been some level of progress made on the promises. If you don't remind politicians of their social contract, trust me, they will forget. The only time they're going to remember, most of them, is when they need your vote again. So as young people, I think young people should invest in, even at the district level, scorecard, political scorecard. If this person wants to become this, gather yourself, organize yourself into youth groups, hear their agenda. If it matches with what is good for the community and what's going to improve the life of young people, education-wise, some of the policies, or capacity building, all of those things that are job, employment, and all of that, give them a scorecard and monitor those promises they would make, hold them accountable. After a certain period of time, call them back to a town hall meeting and have discussions with them. The thing is, they owe you accountability. Without you, they won't be. Even if some of them try to manipulate the votes, the idea is you have to go out to vote before they can become. So after election is not a time to sit. Post-election is when we advocate for the things that we voted for. So I would encourage young people. We do this in Liberia. It's working for us. It's something that we're going to continue with adequate support to even go towards the district level with representatives and not just the president. So I would encourage young people to do this, not just in Liberia, but other African countries. Hold your leaders accountable. Have a scorecard. Track their political manifestos, their agenda for young people, and re-elect them based on what they would deliver to you. If they go contrary to what they have said, call their attention back to it like, hey, this is what you said you would do. This isn't what you said you would do. Unless it is necessary that whatever the promise be updated or upgraded, they should stick to the agenda, because this is the reason why we voted for you. When we start to think like this as young people, then we are ready to initiate change. Otherwise, we should just forget about politics. But we have a major role to play, whether we are politicians on the ballot box or not. But as citizens in democratic state, young people have a major role to play in the issue of accountability. I would encourage the scorecard. Every politician, every district have a scorecard for them, track their manifestos and their promises, call them to town hall meeting. They owe you accountability. They owe you accountability. Their leadership should be as transparent as a glass of water. If you want privacy, don't come in the public sector. But once you have my vote, you owe me accountability. That's how I see it.
Exactly, and accountability, it is accountability, holds us leaders to be able to reflect and be more transparent with whatever they have in developing, not just their respective countries, but like we always say, the greater African continent. I'll borrow a statement which your co-panelist Hassan borrowed from a Ghanaian leader, Kwame Nkrumah, but I would direct this time around to economic freedom. Hassan, hope you permit me. It says, Kwame Nkrumah, from my perspective, this is what I always say: seek first economic freedom, economic independence, and every other thing shall be added unto you. Yeah. Now, the reason I'm telling it this way is because you are literally in the economic sphere, and in Cameroon, you do something I like to call you an entrepreneur, to some extent. Now, it's often said that the economic sector is quite important for the growth and development of every country. With what you have gotten to experience, like you mentioned, you have trained a couple or thousands of youths, not just in Cameroon, it spans across different countries, including African nations. With the experience you've been able to gather, you heard what your co-panelists had to say. What could you tell the African youths, about investing in trying to be job creators rather than job seekers, rather than sitting? Yeah, it's true that the African youth has to invest in getting more engaged in politics. They have to get more engaged in trying to make decisions across, the various countries. I remember when the Ghanaian president was recently inaugurated a couple of months back, he stated that he wanted to reset his economy. Now, moving away from what, the Ghanaian president said, looking at the context of Cameroon, how can the Cameroonian youth move from expecting that maybe 30,000 jobs will be created every year to trying to be that, you know, that bone that lifts up the nation. I think that goes, you know, to every African country. So we'll stop having these issues of, you know, the economic crisis in various countries and so on and so forth. So how can we move past that?
Yeah.
Nobore, from your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I don't know, it makes me happy because I'm a living experience, or a living testimony of what I'm going to share with regards to this. It's very, very possible, irrespective of where you find yourself. Even if you find yourself at a position wherein you don't have access to most probably good water to drink, you're unemployed, you have no connections, you have, you know, no assistance, and even if you have no education, it's still very, very possible to be able to take action, to be very, very successful. I'm going to use an example of Cosmas, is it Dakuma? I think it's an entrepreneur in Nigeria who, this is someone whom I think he lost his father when he was still very young, 6 or 7, and the mother had to send him over to his uncle to work for his uncle, and he lived in a store with no windows and all of that, you know, apprenticeship and all of that. Did that for 6 years, no payment, and after 6 years went to church to pray for his boss's business, and the boss discovered that he has shut down his shop for 3 days. You know, these people look at their business as religion, so he came home furious, gave him 200 naira, and that was, whereas the settlement was after he's done his apprenticeship, he has to be set up with the store, give him funding, pay for his business for about 5 years so he can start up something. So this is someone whom still at a very young age, very, you know, a minor, sent out independent at this point in time. But look at him today, he's one of the richest in Africa, you know, running, I think it was recently announced he's worth $800 million. So just to see that we know education, he never ever went to school. So just to say, if you are listening and most probably you are thinking, how can you, you know, we're talking about economics, how can you begin? You go out there and provide value, work for free. I think that is the beginning. For me, when I found myself,
volunteerism,
yes, volunteer and all of that. When I began as well, when I found myself at one point, you know, it was easy. My start was easy, but I got myself to a point where I couldn't feed myself and I was unemployed. So the very first thing is just get into a position wherein, you know, you're providing value, go work for someone for free. And, you know, once you're in a system which is generating income, and even if you are not being paid and you're providing services, you're providing whatever you are good in, you can begin moving yourself towards, you know, as you're in there, you need to start learning some skills. You know, you need to start learning some skills, people skills, communication skills. The government or the elderly will not save you. No one is coming to save you. So independently, we need to really start taking action on that. And once you begin having some income coming in, most probably you have a job. If you're fortunate to have a job, you're blessed. And that is sufficient capital for you to be able to move yourself into any height. The very first thing I would recommend any youth out there to begin doing is investing in yourself, your knowledge. You could invest in any business idea, and you know, business is what it is. It could always crumble, but if you invest in yourself, whatever you read, you know, education, you know, personal development, you will never lose that. I think from a personal perspective, that is one of the things which I think gives me confidence at this point in time. Initially, when I had my first job, I was always, you know, if you're doing anything and you're doing it against you know, your bosses, you're that scared and all of that. Today, I really have no fear. Even if I get down to zero, I'm very, very confident that I can step up due to the skills which I have learned. So the very, very first thing, today with just a phone, it really makes it really very easy, not only to educate yourself, but to earn income. So it all starts off with what personal effort are you putting in to educate yourself? And again, once you've gotten that knowledge without application is, I don't know, it's, useless. So until you can, put what you know into productivity, only then will you have the results coming in. And I feel that is really the basis, like one of the co-panelists mentioned, funding and finances, because when we talk about poor living conditions, when we talk about poor health, when we talk about poor educational systems, if there was sufficient funding, I think all of this is going to be resolved. So rather than waiting for the government, or rather than waiting for your parents, it said you could be born poor, that is not your fault, but if you die poor, that is certainly your fault. That's certainly your fault. So rather than waiting for others to have this done for you, I think from a personal perspective, it is very, very possible to create these resources. And once you begin doing this, I feel you will begin attracting, attention. You begin attracting attention, and in this way gives you the opportunity to begin, I have many people who come over to me for advice, and that's how I gradually got into the training sphere and all of that. And I'm very, very positive. I don't know where this could carry me or every person that does this tomorrow. I believe this is one of the strategies, like I was talking about, an alternative measure towards, treating conflict, is by showing that you're providing value, you're helping, you've been able to take 100,000, you start a business initiative, you're working, and most probably you've saved a couple of your money, you have 100,000, and you start a little business, and you've been able to transform that 100,000 to 150,000. And if you come up with another business idea, which it's most probably 500,000, and you take it to a business investors, and you tell them, I was able to transform 100,000 to 150,000. If you give me 500,000, I'll be able to transform it to 1 million. I'm very sure you'll find people out there who will take a risk on you. But if you haven't achieved anything, I'm very sure you'll just have that conversation and they're just waiting for you to finish and most probably go. I believe the same thing could be transitioned into stepping into leadership roles in our various countries and in Africa, with us looking for ways by which we could be, of value to our communities. Let's all start from there, to our communities, and I think every other thing will be added onto us.
Every other thing would indeed be added onto us. Thank you, Mansley Gilbert Kimbi, marketing consultant, and of course, youth leader. Now, over to you, back to Hassan, but just to remind our audience that you're watching us on 4U Television and as well listening to us on 4U Radio FM 926.3, and we're streaming on our respective social media platforms. Now, back to Hassan. We're gradually coming to the end of today's edition, but then, with what's happened from the conversation, we've shared a lot of points, from citing ways or suggesting options through which we can be able to create more change in our respective communities and to a greater extent on the African continent. What would you want a youth leader or any youth that is listening to you at this particular point in time to retain after this conversation, as to how they can better impact their respective communities?
Well, the first thing is to say that every young person must improve on themselves. And that's why every point made by my colleague about personal development, about trying to create value, I consider them very valid. Everything that we have to do individually to survive, then to thrive, is very, very legitimate. The only thing is that we have to try and move from just fighting for ourselves alone to also trying to better our community. So young people, do everything you can to survive, to thrive, but also create time to begin to make your environment and your society better. And that can only happen from the point of view of organizing. And in organizing, you must be able to be able to organize very well. You must be politically educated, And that requires ideological education. It requires understanding the history of your country, where you are coming from, all of the labors and sweat of the past generation, all of the struggles that have been waged against colonialism, all of that are needed, to be able to build a new vision, for your country and for Africa. So you must organize, and from organizing, you can resist oppression, you can resist the attacks on the rights of the people, ensure you enforce accountability from leaders, because when you don't enforce accountability, you foster impunity, something which means that people then think that that is how it's done. But by demanding accountability, you have to set an agenda, for government, and that is part of the building block towards, being able to also transition into power, because there's actually no, wall between activism and politics, in that sense. Activism can inform politics, and that is why young people who are listening today must recognize that we just don't need to complain. We must also begin to organize, to take power, and to utilize power to make Africa better than what it is right now.
Indeed, we are, like is often said, the youth of Africa are the future of today and not really the future of tomorrow. Since we're already at the end, thank you immensely, Mr. Hassan TAIWO, for taking our time to join us on today's edition of the program. Just to reiterate, before we wrap up, that you are the national coordinator of the Education Rights Campaign based in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much. Now, before I of course, draw down the curtains of today's edition, now, Mr. Gilbert Kimbi, just in a few words before we conclude or culminate today's edition, what is your way forward for Africa's youth as far as engaging in leadership roles is concerned?
Okay, looking at the way forward towards engaging in leadership will be, first of all, gaining knowledge on what the policies, gaining knowledge on the different councils, how, are there any youth policies, are there any youth movements, what is already existing for us, the youths in our various countries here in Africa. Once we get these, getting the experience, like one of the co-panelists actually did mention, we begin, preparing ourselves to step into, this role should we get the opportunity then in future. And again, while gaining this experience and getting to know what is existing, begin looking into, okay, what change is going to be required for things to exist how we think they should exist. And very last point will be, on a personal note, what are we doing to contribute? Should there be any, like co-panelists was talking about, when it's election and all of that, contribute, go and make sure you elect. So make sure your voice is heard at any point in time. You have the opportunity to contribute in any activity that is going on nationwide, continent-wide. Make sure you give your contribution, and the rest, it's usually going to be unanimous decision. The majority, the decision is going to come from the majority, but make sure you're contributing, so that tomorrow, whenever you're given the opportunity to be able to, step into that leadership role, you've gotten the experience, you've participated, and you've seen the results. I think you'll be better off, which all will be better off prepared, to stand up into this.
Thank you immensely. I am really great and happy that I had such a very impactful conversation with you all, great leaders, great minds. I really do appreciate, not forgetting ALPHIA KEMOKIA, who couldn't make it up to the end, but she shared her views, all the way from Liberia. Thank you so much, Hassan. Thank you, Gilbert, for taking our time to be with us this day. And of course, one thing I was able to retain is that it's always important for young leaders to be able to practice accountability, you know, practice transparency, contribute. They should dare, you know, to work towards the change they intend to see in their respective communities, countries, and the African continent. We were discussing, you know, from protests to policies across Africa, trying to understand Africa's youth steps in leadership roles across different African countries. We believe you learned a lot from today's conversation, ladies and gentlemen. On that note, that brings us to the end of today's edition of the program Talking Point on 4U Media Africa. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and do have a beautiful day in company of our numerous programs.